All right, so we are back with the next portion, which is why writers fall into the trap of the megaphone effect, and some of my answers. If you have the document, you should see an outline with a bunch of different suggestions and so on. So, generally speaking, there's a lot of advantage to the info dumping, and the general idea is that you have readers and viewers understanding the backstory of what the writer is really trying to get at. That makes sense. That's why writers fall into this trap, because then the audience understands. The negative of that is it's unnatural, just like Bob and Jane in the earlier example. Also, if writers don't want to have a really complex set of characters, then the megaphone effect lets them avoid that, because you don't need this conversation to take place where one character is asking questions and the other one answers it. So the lack of the need for additional characters to explain the backstory to means ultimately the megaphone effect serves as a way to directly talk to the audience. The problem with that, you kind of lose out of the point of what plays are all about. The relationships, the emotional, the stylistic, the intellectual needs of figuring out these things for themselves. So info dumping ultimately is not really good for the life of the play. Another reason to fall into the trap is that the topic has a whole lot of world building going on, or it's really jargon heavy. What that means is that the world being built is so unique and different from what the average person would know about that the explanation is actually necessary. And often these are worlds with very specific jargon. Jargon, if you don't know, is the idea that there's a profession or a world or an area that has specific words that members of that society would actually know about. So if you've seen two teachers talk to each other, they might use words that teachers understand, but the average public doesn't. If you talk to two scientists, they have a shortcut for certain words. Or in the military, very often there's a whole lot of abbreviations going on, and the non-military people who are listening to this don't actually know what those means unless they have looked it up or they're told. So the world building or the jargon-heavy content is a temptation to a tempting reason to put a lot of info dumping in. And then the next one, I've actually fallen into this trap a few times, and the idea behind this is that the writer doesn't exactly know the backstory themselves. So the writing it down is actually helping the writer write the story. So the good part is, yay, the writer actually does figure it out eventually. But the negative of that is, if not revised, it's going to feel just like a summary of what the world building is like. And the story will take such a backseat that it will just feel like kind of a premise as opposed to an actual story. And then finally, one of the reasons that I think is almost the only one that's out of the control of the author is the structural limitations. So if you are doing a play that is judged, or a state competition or something like that, and there's a time limit on it, or perhaps there's a competition in which you have to use certain words or phrases or certain props, any of these structural limitations, sometimes the megaphone effect is a quick way around it, and then you can get to the meat of what you want to do. Positive, again, just like all these others, the audience knows the backstory. The negative is that this can be seen as the tool serving the structure instead of the other way around, where the structure should actually be serving the needs of the story. All right, before we get too heavy on this idea that the megaphone effect is evil or something like this, I should probably let you know that if you've been to the movie theaters or binged something recently, there's a whole lot of scripts and plays and TV shows and short stories, books that fall into this trap all the time, and they are making money hand over fist. In fact, right now, as we speak, there's some record breaking going on with the new Christopher Nolan film. Probably in about a day or two, which is about 3 weeks from its release, his new movie will probably reach the $1 billion box office mark, which is a very unique club to be in. And Nolan, among others, Nolan is pretty famous for falling into the megaphone trap. So what does Nolan and some other authors do that allow them to be so successful at it, and at the same time not have to worry about the relationship or the success? That's what we're going to get into in just a moment.